Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 291, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2, and this card is absolutely incredible. It is stacked with amazing fights, particularly the pay-per-view main card is compelling matchup after compelling matchup after compelling matchup, and this is going to be the top 3 reasons I love UFC 291. I'm going to start off with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being the reason I most love UFC 291. Starting off with my first honorable mention, this card is in Salt Lake City, Utah at elevation. And I'm very curious to see how Derek Lewis's cardio holds up. He's fighting Marcos Rogerio de Lima, and this fight could end up being comical. Because if it gets out of the first round, de Lima nor Lewis has a good gas tank. And Derek Lewis, honestly, I mean, he's shown horrible stamina in the past, even with low output. So let's say Derek Lewis chases a finish in the first round, doesn't get it. We could end up with a fight that looks very similar to Kimbo Slice versus Dada 5000, where they're exhausted, they're falling over the cage. I mean, who thought it was a good idea? Whether it be Derek Lewis, whether it be his manager, whether it be his coaches, whether it be the UFC, whether it be any of the matchmakers for the UFC, who thought it was a good idea? Leah, let's put Derek Lewis in Salt Lake City, Utah at elevation. After every fight card that's at elevation, there's always fan bases complaining and fighters complaining, oh, they would have won, but it was at elevation. And I'm curious, does Derek Lewis, did he make any adjustments? His stamina was already not good. Did he go there a couple weeks early to acclimatize himself? I don't know. I doubt it. And what is he going to do to be able to try to maintain his gas tank? Is he just not going to throw any strikes? Is this going to be like Derek Lewis, Francis Ngannou? Is it going to be similar to that? Because if he gasses out in that first round, it's going to be an ugly, ugly fight. So I hope somebody gets a finish in the first round, because otherwise, I mean, this is going to be a terrible fight, but it will be comical. At this point, I wonder, is Derek Lewis's corner going to push him out to the cage so he can save his energy? Because I think he may gas in the walkout. At that elevation, I just don't trust Derek Lewis's cardio at all. I don't trust Marcos Rogerio de Lima's cardio either, but I think that'll be something very interesting to keep an eye on. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Michel Pereira should be a stylistically fan-friendly matchup. It should be primarily striking. And I know I crap on Wonderboy Thompson a bit because I say, oh, he's turning down fights. You know, he doesn't want to fight anybody who has any type of wrestling background. If you wrestled in middle school, if you wrestled in elementary school, Wonderboy Thompson will turn down the fight with you. But with all that being said, and that is disappointing, he kind of squats on his rank and he looks for matchups kind of lower in the rankings or outside the rankings, favorable matchups that he can win. I do think this will be a very good striking matchup, and I think it'll be very fan-friendly. And Wonderboy Thompson, his last fight, a lot of people were counting him out against Kevin Holland. They were, oh, he's going to get washed by Kevin Holland. You know, Wonderboy's 40 years old. He's slowing down. He doesn't have a chin. Kevin Holland's going to knock him out. Not me. I picked Wonderboy. And Wonderboy went out there and proved that he is still a world-class kickboxer. And Michel Pereira is coming to strike. Michel Pereira is not coming to look for takedowns. Michel Pereira comes to entertain. You know, he famously lost that one fight where he's doing backflips in the cage and gasses out. So I think in terms of a fan-friendly matchup, Wonderboy Thompson, Michel Pereira is a fan-friendly matchup. And I love watching Wonderboy strike. I love the way he strikes. I love the technical ability. I love the way he throws certain kicks. I'll never forget that spinning back kick KO of Johnny Hendricks back when Johnny Hendricks was actually good. So even though I did kind of crap on this matchup a little bit, I do think it's worth noting on the pay-per-view card, it will be a very fun, striking matchup to watch. Now, moving on to my actual list, starting off at number 3, and that is that Tony Ferguson can win a fight at UFC 291. People have been burying Tony Ferguson for a long time, and I understand it. Now he's lost 5 in a row. He lost to Justin Gaethje on short notice, lost to Charles Oliveira, lost to Beneil Dariush, got his head punted off by Michael Chandler, and he most recently lost to Nate Diaz. And in that fight, he looked horrible. Nate Diaz looked horrible, and it just seemed like Tony Ferguson of old was completely gone. There wasn't even 10% of him in there. But I think people forget to put it in context. And for a while, I was getting called like biased towards Tony Ferguson because Tony lost to Justin Gaethje. I picked Justin Gaethje to beat him. Justin Gaethje went out there and outstruck him, landed good power shots. I picked him to lose against Charles Oliveira. Oliveira just went out there, outgrappled him. Beneil Dariush went out there and outgrappled him. And then he fought Michael Chandler. And I told everyone, I think Tony's going to beat Michael Chandler. And Tony was winning this fight. Tony was looking good. And then he got his head punted off. He got flatline KO by a front kick. And I think this changed Tony Ferguson. I do think this increased the inevitable decline of Tony Ferguson. But what I don't think people realize going into that Nate Diaz fight is the UFC sabotaged Tony. And I'm wondering and I'm thinking, did Tony look as bad as he did because the UFC sabotaged him? And what I mean by that is, a lot of people don't remember, UFC 279 was thrown together on 3 weeks' notice. They basically had the main event, Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz. That was the original main event. And then they had nothing underneath of it. Then out of nowhere, they announced Kevin Holland versus Daniel Rodriguez and Tony Ferguson versus Li Jingliang. They announced that 2 to 3 weeks before UFC 279. So Tony Ferguson took the Li Jingliang fight on 2 to 3 weeks notice, and then on 24 hours notice, once Khamzat Chimaev missed weight, they then switched the matchups around and gave Tony Ferguson Nate Diaz in the main event instead because Khamzat missed weight. And I think that was for the best because I think Li Jingliang would have absolutely dirted Tony Ferguson badly. But at the same time, I think that's why Tony looked so bad. Don't get me wrong. I do think the Michael Chandler KO had an impact. I do think the Gaethje beating had an impact. I do think the fact that he's getting older in general has an impact. But I don't think he's going to look as bad as people think he's going to look just because he did take that fight on 3 weeks notice and then 24 hours notice for the then change in matchup on the same date. And he's fighting Bobby Green. I think he can beat Bobby Green. Bobby Green is hit or miss. Sometimes he comes out, he looks like a world beater. The striking looks crazy and it looks elite. And he goes out there and finishes a guy who's lower level in Ali Quinta. And people are saying, oh, Bobby Green needs to step up. Or he fights Rafael Fiziev. And Fiziev, because of the crazy output, starts to slow down in the third round. Bobby Green looks good in the third round. But Bobby Green's getting up there in age as well. Bobby Green's 36 years old. He's not, crazy old like Tony Ferguson, who's almost 40. But I think this is a winnable matchup for Tony Ferguson. I think he could win this fight. I'm not saying he's going to win this fight. We'll talk about that when I do my UFC 291 predictions. But I am really hoping, and I'm really praying to the MMA gods. Please, MMA gods, let Tony Ferguson win a fight. And I would really hope if he does win this fight, and I don't think it's going to happen, but I hope if he did win this fight, let's say he wins it in spectacular fashion, Tony hurts him on the feet and then Darce chokes him. I really hope Tony rides off into the sunset. I hope Tony retires in the cage. I would love a Robbie Lawler-esque send-off for Tony Ferguson because we don't get those too often in the UFC and in MMA in general. And he's on this 5-fight losing streak. The only fight he was borderline in was the Chandler fight and the Diaz fight, but watching his dead, lifeless body just fall to the ground against Michael Chandler was hard to watch. And it's just a far cry from Tony Ferguson in 2019, where he's just savagely beating Donald Cowboy Cerrone and savagely beating Anthony Pettis and beating up Kevin Lee and finishing Kevin Lee and but beating Rafael Dos Anjos, which was probably one of his best wins on his entire resume. And at one point in time, Tony Ferguson was the lightweight boogeyman. People did not want to fight him. The guy put pace on guys and volume on guys and damage on guys, and it was just such a lethal weapon. And just to see him starting to decline and eventually fall off a cliff, which he appeared to do against Nate Diaz, I'm hoping it was because of the short notice step in, and I'm really hoping that Tony Ferguson gets a win against Bobby Green. Honestly, if Ferguson could get a win against Green at UFC 291, I don't care if I got every fight prediction wrong on the entire card, look like a complete idiot, 0-12 on the card. If Tony Ferguson can just get a win, that's how much I want to see Tony Ferguson win. So I'm hoping it happens. And if it does happen, it would probably deserve to be my number one reason I love UFC 291 if I already knew into the future. But moving on to my number 2 reason I love UFC 291, and that is the significance of the co-main event and also the leg kick battle we are going to witness in the co-main event. The co-main event is Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira moving up to 205 pounds, the light heavyweight division. And this was already a big matchup in the division. Jan Blachowicz coming off a title fight where he fought to a draw. Jan Blachowicz, a former champion. Jan Blachowicz lost his title to Alex Pereira's coach in Glover Teixeira. And this was already a big fight for the division because Alex Pereira, former middleweight champion, a lot of people thought, okay, if he moves up, he could have more success at 205 because he's not cutting weight. And this fight just got even more important because Jamal Hill just vacated the light heavyweight title. He tore his Achilles. Now, maybe there's still a chance the UFC puts the title on the line for this fight. I don't think so. I think they would have announced it by now. But regardless, the winner of this fight is in a very good position in the light heavyweight title picture because Yuri Prochazka, we still don't know when he was going to return. But if he does return soon, you could potentially see the winner of this fight versus Yuri Prochazka for the vacant belt, because it's looking like Jamal Hill won't be back until maybe summer of 2024. So they're going to move on, and this fight is a logical #1 contender fight. I'm glad they didn't put the title on the line for this fight, because Jan Blachowicz, coming off a draw where a lot of people thought he lost to Ankalaev. Alex Pereira coming off that KO loss, that brutal KO loss to Israel Adesanya. I don't really think they deserve to be fighting for a title yet. But if Alex Pereira can go out there and finish Jan Blachowicz, or Jan Blachowicz can go out there and finish Alex Pereira, I think they're right up there in the discussion. And when you look at the layout of the division with guys injured or coming off losses, it's probably the most, it makes the most sense in terms of how to match make the light heavyweight division. Yuri Prochazka versus the winner of Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira. But plus, this is just such an amazing striking matchup. I mean, Jan Blachowicz has some of the best leg kicks in MMA, and he's one of the best leg kick checkers in MMA. Look what he did to Ankalaev's legs in their fight. He was out leg kicking Israel Adesanya when he fought him. Adesanya is one of the best leg kickers. And guess what? Alex Pereira is one of the best leg kickers as well. So I'm very curious who wins the leg kicking battle in this fight, because Pereira has these long leg kicks where they do a lot of damage and they just happen so fast. Like, he has no telegraph on him. He just lands them so quick, but they cause significant damage. But Jan is known for checking like every single leg kick. The checking of the leg kicks may very well have won him the Alexander Rakic fight. And he just goes out there and brutalizes everyone's legs. So I'm very curious. I know Jan Blachowicz has the grappling in his back pocket and may mix it in and take down Alex Pereira. But I'm very curious how that leg kick battle plays out. And we cannot discount the significance of this fight, that it puts them in title contention and may very well have them fighting Yuri Prochazka for the vacant belt in their next fight. Because ever since John Jones vacated his belt back in 2020, there's been a shadow looming over the division. And I'm very curious. I mean, think about Yuri Prochazka versus Jan Blachowicz, or Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. What a light heavyweight matchup that would be. And if one of these guys gets a quick finish, don't be surprised if they get a quick turnaround. Maybe UFC 293, maybe UFC 294, fighting for the light heavyweight title. It'd be very compelling. So this fight last week got a whole lot more important, and it's just already such a quality matchup. So that's why it's my #2 reason. Moving on to my #1 reason I am looking forward to UFC 291, and that has to be the main event. You look at Dustin Poirier, 15 of his 29 wins come via KO or TKO. That is craziness. 22 wins total of 29 by finish. You look at Justin Gaethje, I mean, this is insane. 18 of his 24 wins are by KO or TKO. Overall, 20 of his 24 wins are by finish. This fight is a match made in heaven for hardcore MMA fans. This will be an absolute savagery of a display at UFC 291. I hate the BMF titles on the line, but I mean, this fight is massive. This is two of the most exciting fighters of our time period, and I don't think we appreciate them enough. Dustin Poirier, when's he ever been in a boring fight? I mean, you look at his last few fights. The Michael Chandler fight, I mean, crazy good. He gets the rear naked choke in the 3rd round. Fight before that, very compelling against Charles Oliveira, very exciting against Charles Oliveira. Fight before that, Conor McGregor breaks his leg. Dustin Poirier winning the fight before that. Fight before that, knocks out Conor McGregor, avenges his initial loss from all the way back in like 2013. Fight before that, Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. One of the most underrated fights of all time. That's an amazing fight. If you haven't watched that recently or have never seen it, go back and watch Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. That's one of the greatest fights in MMA history. You go back, okay, the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight, he lost. It wasn't all that crazy exciting. He got finished. Fight before that, Max Holloway for an interim belt. Crazy good fight. This guy is never in a boring fight. The Eddie Alvarez fight, great fight. Justin Gaethje back in 2018, the first fight. Amazing fight. Crazy leg kicks, absorbing a lot of damage for both guys. Eventually gets to finish in the 4th round. I mean, this is a match made in heaven. And you look at Justin Gaethje. I mean, I can go through the list of names. The Rafael Fiziev fight, everyone was counting him out. Exciting fight, and he pulls off the victory. The fight against Charles Oliveira only lasted 1 round, but amazing fight. The fight against Michael Chandler, I know the 3rd round wasn't that good, but that was one of the best fights of that year. The fight against Khabib, okay, he got finished. He got finished in the 2nd round, but it was still an exciting fight, not as crazy as some of the other fights. Steps in on short notice against Tony Ferguson, absolutely bludgeons him. I mean, Justin Gaethje, even I used to watch him when back in WSOF. The fights against Luis Palomino were crazy. The UFC debut against Michael Johnson was crazy. The loss to Eddie Alvarez is because Justin Gaethje was so wild and crazy, but he's kind of refined his style where he's still crazy and chaotic, but at the same time, he's kind of a little bit more measured and a little bit more defensively responsible. And also, both these guys have some of the best leg kicks in the game. Justin Gaethje has the advantage. I mean, this guy just chops guys' legs repeatedly. I remember going into the Edson Barboza fight, he's like, yeah, I want Edson Barboza to challenge me with leg kicks. I want to go leg kick for leg kick against Edson Barboza. And Edson Barboza was considered one of the most deadly leg kickers in the UFC of all time. So this matchup, no matter how you look at it, it's going to be fun. It's going to be very, very fun. This is a hardcore fan's dream because not only is it going to be a crazy wild fight, both guys are elite level strikers. So it's not one of these low level like barn burners where both guys are swinging wild and non-technical and they don't look particularly good. Both these guys are crazy brawlers, but also technical and also elite and some of the best fighters in the lightweight weight class. And I am so excited for this main event. How can you not love this fight? And also, it has title implications. You have Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira coming up at UFC 294. The winner of Poirier versus Gaethje is going to be in a good position, potentially next in line for a lightweight title shot, depending on what happens with Alexander Volkanovski. So there's really nothing not to love about this main event. And I feel like almost we're beating a dead horse because since it was announced, everyone's been like, oh, this is going to be exciting for sure. But I had to mention it, and there's no way I could find anything to top that on the list. This is going to be a crazy, wild fight. I hate when people say, oh, this was a war. This is going to be an absolute war if it doesn't get finished early. But who knows what's bound to happen in this fight. But I'll tell you this is not going to be a boring fight. It's going to be an absolute crazy matchup. Both guys looking to finish each other. And I'm really looking forward to Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2. And that's why it is my #1 reason I love UFC 291. Let me know down in the comments, what is your #1 reason you are looking forward to this card? Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.